Greetings, Information Superhighway. My name is Jared Zeidman, and welcome to episode 4 of the Nail the Recruiting Process podcast. This is coming out a week late, and I think I have a really good excuse because as of this recording, I'm recording this on July 7th. So a little less than 1 week ago, 6 days ago to be exact, my son was born. So this is a very, very awesome time in the Zeidman household. His name is Miles. He is certifiably a little dude. 6 pounds, 10 ounces at birth. He is back at his original weight now, and he's adorable. And if you even look at him the wrong way, I'm coming for you. Fatherhood so far has been amazing. I'm also just so proud of my wife who, had charted out a plan. We had our birth plan kind of put in steps. And, Carolyn said, I want to have a medicine-free birth. If I'm able to give birth naturally, I want to go the whole way naturally. And, my response was, I'm with you. And I think that's great. But, to steal the old Mike Tyson adage, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And I figured there was going to be some face punching that day. And to her credit, completely medication-free. The strongest and most amazing thing I've ever seen another human being do. It was really, really unbelievable. So super proud of her. She and Miles are asleep in the other room right now, but I imagine that in future podcast episodes, you will see Miles. I will be sharing him because he's an adorable little dude. I will also say thank you to all of my friends, both, from childhood, through college, and my friends in the coaching profession with young kids. They gave me a lot of advice about, what this early time would look like, what the birthing process would look like. And they were spot on. And I really am so grateful for everything they shared with me, with one notable exception. No one adequately prepared me for the amount of times that my newborn was going to pee on me. It's just, it's a lot. Like if we were doing like baseball contract percentages, he would be like the leading salary in peeing on your dad when he changes your diaper. But I've learned some techniques that have made it a little bit better, but I'm really excited for that phase to end. And then of course I go back to all these people and I'm like, hey, this seemed like an important detail that you were gonna mention to me, but you didn't. Like, you were right about everything else. How come you didn't tell me that my son was just going to pee on me every time I changed him? And the consensus response was like, oh yeah, that's a thing. So I think that maybe that's like a weird rite of passage from current parent to future parent, is this no one tells you. So let me be the person that tells you, if you have a newborn boy, he cannot control his bladder yet, and the change in temperature is going to require him to pee. So you might think he's done, but he's not done. He's never done. He's never done. And honestly, I've been laughing about that, and I can't even complain about that either. This has been the best week of my life, and I'm so grateful for you all for being patient with me. We got great feedback about the Colleen Ames episode, even though it came out a little bit late. I'm thrilled about the episode that's coming your way today. Before we talk a little bit more about that, I do want to address the question of the week. And I got 2 different families that emailed me with the same question. So I'm going to take a multifaceted approach at this one. The question essentially was, I have a young child that's really, really interested in playing basketball collegiately, but they're very young. They're middle school aged. When do we start taking this seriously? There's so much information on social media out there. There's so many different means of comparison. How do we really discern when we should get started? And what I want to say first and foremost is, despite what you see on social media, 99.5% of the time, no one's being offered a roster spot anywhere at any level until they're a first year in high school. So the very first thing I want you to do is make this sport as fun as possible for your children through middle school. Even as they're in high school, I want your talking points with them to be how much you enjoy watching them play, how much you enjoy watching them grow, how much you enjoy watching them compete. But obviously, other conversations are going to start at the high school level. Keep those conversations at bay through the middle school level. What I would say is really try to get started in your first year. And again, if we focus on our gear, and a reminder for some potentially new listeners, G is for growth oriented, E is for engaged, how you engage with coaches, both yours and potentially future college coaches in the process, and your teammates. A is aware, so building up your own self-awareness in terms of your own strengths and limitations and what you want out of the next steps, but then also awareness about your needs. What college is the right fit for you, kind of stuff. And then the last one is ready. And for the older people in the room, you can freely interchange ready with resilience. Either of those R's work for you in gear. So what I would encourage you to do is start focusing on your gear. There are a lot of core awareness areas that your child will start developing as a first year in high school. What academic subjects are they most interested in now that they're taking a diverse pool in high school? What are they really starting to think about doing? And by the way, they're totally fine to change their minds. I recruited more undecideds than anything else in my 15 years at the collegiate level. And I also think that there is a lot more awareness stuff on the subject of, I guess we'll call it, an assessment. What position do you really want to play? What are you good at? What do you need to get better at? How do you respond to coaching? What type of coaching do you want to seek out more of? And these answers are going to differ from person to person. There are anything else you can think of. I'm just giving you some examples right now. As a core awareness area question, probably fits. Visit a couple college campuses. Do some of you immediately give you an overwhelming feeling in your gut? Okay, those are probably not it. Do some of them make you feel really good in your gut right off the rip? Yep, those could probably be the ones. Start thinking about what those things have in common. What are the schools that give you a bad gut vibe have in common? What are the schools that give you a good gut vibe have in common? Same with coaches. You're going to keep asking yourself those things through your first year so that in the spring of your first year, when you're either playing club or you have a full high school season's worth of film, you can start reaching out to coaches, knowing a little bit more about what it is you want and having a bit more substance to your conversations, because you're going to continue hearing from the coaches that I spoke to that substantial conversations on the phone matters. There is a bonus question that's coming with this episode, and it's going to help me segue into this specific week's edition of the podcast. You are going to hear an accomplished Division I coach say out loud that he doesn't open emails from recruiting services. So I'm going to ask the question for you. I imagine you're going to hear this and you're going to ask yourselves, is this true? And allow me to answer, yes, it is. In every line of work, I have been more apt to open and respond to emails that I knew were clearly sent by a person than emails sent by a service. Two reasons, and I want to dive into them really quick before we get going. Reason one, you delete 30 advertising, marketing, service emails a day. Absolute minimum. You open up your email and you delete them. So you can't hold us to a different standard than you'd hold yourself. They're annoying. You know that whoever did it just punched your name into an algorithm, didn't do any homework, that kind of stuff. So don't use it. You know, a good alternative could be a site like Sports Recruits, where you can kind of get all your information in one place and then learn more about schools that are looking for you. So like if you wanted to use a service, go in that direction rather than, using a service that does everything for you. And that's part two. Part of getting ready for the collegiate experience is learning how to be self-sufficient. So if you can prove along the recruiting process that you know how to be self-sufficient as an athlete, that's really helpful. And you can give a coach the impression that you can take their coaching, that you will continue growing because you're willing to be self-sufficient. What does self-sufficiency look like when you engage? Simple. You send emails. You send them. You look up the schools, you make notes about what interests you because you did the homework on your awareness areas. That's why I asked question one beforehand. And you make sure in your emails that you leave a lasting impression. That makes a much bigger impact in my experience, because this process goes one of two ways. Either a coach knows nothing about you and they see you play and then they initiate the conversation, or you initiate the conversation in email to the coaching staff. And you should not go through this process just thinking that example one is going to be what happens to you, because I've seen people lose out on opportunities for that. You engage with coaches. Now, I mentioned that I was a D1 coach that shared that piece of information that I wanted to fact check beforehand. Let's talk a little bit more about him. I worked at Union College for 10 years. And about halfway through my time at Union College, I met a young man named Ben Lee when he was a first year on the Union men's basketball team. Now, during Ben's time at Union, he was, and you'll hear him talk about this, he was a bench player. He played limited minutes, but he had an incredible mind for the game. So much so that in my very first interaction with him, when he was 18, we were working a summer camp together. He told me that he aspired to be a college basketball coach. That's what he wanted to do professionally. He got tremendous mentorship from a great men's basketball staff at Union. He was a part of 2 teams that won conference championships back-to-back years. The teams looked very different year to year, and each year was impressive for its own reason. He also helped his teams win a pair of NCAA tournament games. This guy was extremely popular amongst both his teammates and his coaching staffs. He then segued that experience as an athlete to becoming a graduate assistant for, at that time, Pac-12 Washington University, which is an amazing adjustment, going from strong academic D3 to, at that time, the Power 5. He succeeded there, and then he worked for several years on the high-level club and circuit side of high school basketball. So this guy not only recruited top high school athletes, but he also organized events through Made Hoops to showcase those high-level athletes. So this is a guy with a tremendous sense of how the recruiting process works on both ways. After that experience with Made Hoops, he returned to Washington as an assistant coach and recruiting coordinator, and now he's making his return to the Capital Region at the D1 level. So only about 10 miles from where he played his college basketball, Ben Lee will now be the first assistant at Siena University. His head coach is Gerry McNamara. If you don't know Gerry McNamara, he's a New York college basketball legend, played his college ball at Syracuse, and this is his first head coaching job. You're going to learn how Ben got this position, the most important learning experiences to Ben as he's gotten this far in his career, and most importantly, for you listening to this podcast, you're going to learn what Ben looks for as he recruits. A very important thing, because I think as far as it relates to your gear, this is a huge awareness-oriented podcast. A very big thing you're going to hear Ben talk about is talent tiebreakers. A huge part of our discussion is Ben basically acknowledging that there are more than enough players that are good enough to play at Siena's level, but now they have to find the intangibles that match the mission of the new staff. I think this information is extremely valuable to you, the recruits. I think this interview is going to be tremendously helpful for you. So without further ado, let's get to that interview with Coach Ben Lee. All right, Coach, I got to tell you, and this is a me thing. It's not a you thing. It is weird to see you not in the color garnet, but I will say that the Siena green looks good on you. Coach Ben Lee, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. No, happy to be here. Definitely miss wearing the garnet, miss seeing you in the garnet every day, but happy we could reconnect and do this.
No, I really appreciate the time. So excited to see you back in the Capital Region, and really think that you have a couple of very unique experiences that can lend a lot of perspective to people going through the recruiting process. So if you're ready to roll, we can just cannonball into this.
For sure. Yeah, I'll start by saying, obviously when you were at Union, I was a player, and you were on the women's coaching staff doing everything. You were the guy standing up on the sideline. So I don't know if I'm supposed to call you the head coach or not, but that's what I viewed you as. And no, you always were a grinder and always just respected your work ethic. And I thought you also did a tremendous job throughout your career networking. And when we were able to reconnect, for the first time in a couple of years, about a month or so ago, just so excited with what you're doing with the recruiting process, and been able to watch some clips on Instagram. And I think a lot of kids and families they just don't know, and it's not their fault, but we have a different perspective,
right,
from being on the other side of it. So I think what you're doing provides a tremendous amount of value, and hopefully this podcast can help someone out there.
Yeah, well, you know what? First of all, I really appreciate that. And second of all, this gives us a good place to start, because I don't really know what I was doing at that time either. I was winging it. at Union. I was working hard trying to meet people and wing it. And you were one of only 2 people I have met in my basketball career that my very first conversation with them ever, they told me they wanted to pursue a career in coaching. So I don't even know if you remember this, but to give our listeners a little bit of context, we are working a Union basketball summer camp under the watchful eye of the amazing Chris Murphy, who I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit later. But I meet you, you're working the camp along with me, and I'm just talking to you about professional ambitions, and you are barely 18, and you are telling me, I want to pursue a career in coaching. I know that's what I want to do. I kind of already have my mindset on it, and I really want to learn the game as much as I can while I was in college. So I guess my first question for you, because I think this will help the listeners get to know you really well. How did your time as a college athlete under Coach Murphy and as a member of the Union men's basketball program, how did that prepare you for the first steps that you then took as a coach?
For sure. I mean, I wanted to coach since I was in 7th grade. That's when I had the unfortunate realization that as a unathletic, 5'10" kid that could shoot it and not do much else, that, the NBA wasn't going to be an option. And I had that realization pretty early on, and every decision I made in my life since that time was to coach. And everything I've done was with the goal in mind of coaching. So my time at Union, I think it really prepared me in terms of learning the game. I was able to play for a great coach in Chris Murphy, who taught the game at a super high level and at a level that I had never experienced before. I played at a public high school, played for a really good AAU program, but it was different being in a college program where you're going through a full off season and you're practicing, 2+ hours every day, 6 days a week. And I learned a ton from him, X's and O's wise on the defensive side of the ball. When I ultimately, hopefully one day become a head coach, I'm going to do a lot of the defensive stuff that we did at Union under coach. And I think it really just taught me, I mean, there's so much that goes into it and so much looking back on now that I had no idea, even as I was going through it. But just the X's and O's
Right.
planning, preparing for opponents. Because as you know, in the Liberty League, very rare, definitely we don't do it at this level. We were playing Friday night and then Saturday afternoon. That was how our league schedule was. So
The back-to-backs.
The back-to-backs.
Yep.
So I see people complaining about guys playing 40 minutes. We had guys play 40 minutes in less than 24 hours. They were playing 80 minutes in 2 days. And, you didn't have 1, 2, 3 days to game plan. You had literally shoot around in the morning. So you literally had maybe a film session if you were at the game, and, a film session the next morning and a walkthrough. And it's like, okay, we better know what they're going to do. So I thought Murph and Nick Cerisi, our assistant, they did a tremendous job in terms of preparing us, where it didn't feel like, we just were introduced to that team that morning. So learned a ton just about basketball, just really learned a ton about basketball. And Coach Murphy was great to me because he really allowed me, especially my junior and senior year, to help in that process and to help with the game planning and to ask questions that otherwise players typically wouldn't be able to ask. And I earned that trust during my time there. But, a lot of coaches would have told me to kick rocks and, hey, what do you know? And Murph and Cerisi did a great job of really allowing me to feel like I was a part of it, even though I wasn't getting much time on the floor playing.
I want to ask you about that specifically because, obviously when you're going through this process yourself as a high school athlete, there's certain things and there's certain things you don't. So, maybe in those moments, you don't know that Coach Murphy himself comes from an incredible coaching tree. And
for sure
that, he now is going to coach in a way that elevates the standard. So in your time at Union, you have this incredible learning experience, but the standard is also elevated. And in your time there, Union wins back-to-back Liberty League championships, also wins a pair of NCAA tournament games. And I would love to know, just from your perspective, were there things that you look back on now now that you're, competing at the highest level, the Division I level, that you can kind of look back at that D3 times and kind of be like, oh, the standard's actually not much different. This is, the standard is elevated wherever you play.
For sure. I think it doesn't matter where you're playing. It doesn't matter if it's high school basketball, college basketball, junior college basketball, NAIA, Division I, 2, or 3. It is hard to win basketball games. And,
right.
If you look at Union, I think those are the only 2 championships they've had in the last 15 years. And, we were able to be really successful because of the standard that coach set. Now, we had some very talented players, which you need as well, but we had a culture where losing wasn't an option. And a lot of times it comes from the coach and he sets the standard, but it also has to come from your players. Any team where the players don't have accountability of each other, you're not going to win at a high level. And it was 2 totally different years, our 2 championship years. The first one, we were probably the most talented team in the league. I think we were projected in the preseason to finish 2nd or 3rd in the conference, and were able to obviously make the tournament and win a game in the tournament. And then the following year, we're the defending champs, and we were picked 9th in the preseason poll. And we went from probably one of the most talented team in the league to probably one of the least talented teams in the league. But we had such a connected group that we were able to go win a championship when we definitely didn't have the most talent in the league. So Murph did an incredible job of, setting that standard and making us feel like every game was, a must-win game. And, like you said, regardless of what level you're at, it's not much different. It's not much different. And there's a lot of Division III coaches that could get a Division I job tomorrow and be super successful.
This is so interesting to me, and I think it's going to set up for a really good segue for where you now start your coaching career after Union. So you end up going to Washington with the GA title. I know from interacting with UB in my time in grad school how valuable that GA experience can be. I also know it's a grind. When I was working alongside the GA at UB, I watched him go nuts every day. Tell me what the most important things you learned, in your first peek behind the curtain. What was the most important stuff that you learned, and what was that learning curve like stepping into that GA role at Washington?
Yeah, I mean, that was a whirlwind. It was a whirlwind of a year. Union, you don't graduate till June. So, I got the GA spot at Washington in May. And I literally, 4 days after graduation, packed up and moved across the country. I've lived in New York my entire life. Packed up, moved across the country, stayed in a 225 square foot studio apartment in Siena. And for me, it was a it was a shoebox. It was a shoebox. But, for me, as long as I had a place to sleep, I didn't care because I knew I was going to be working 16, 18-hour days. There were days I slept in the office and slept in the locker room. And, for me, I'm going from Division III to now the highest level of college basketball. And from a learning experience, just seeing, you're coming from Union with a staff of 2 people to now you've got a staff of 8 full-time people at least. And seeing just the day-to-day operations and the care and the attention to detail that it takes to run a program of that level. A lot of people don't realize the people behind the scenes, the ops, the director of operations, your video coordinator, your GAs, your student managers. I mean, you have a program. When we went on a foreign tour that summer, our traveling party of just like our program was 40 people. So that's between staff, athletic trainer, strength and conditioning coach. Like, it's a lot of people. And for me, I was just trying to work my tail off and soak in everything I could. And it was a great learning experience for me, X's and O's basketball wise, but more so everything else. More so what really makes the program run behind the scenes. Picking guys up from the airport, ordering food, stuff that nobody ever thinks about, gets no recognition, but stuff that's really hard and tedious and has to get done every day for a program to run at a high level.
I think, and I can tell you this from my experience, I think the way that you earn your stripes with, the coaching populace is by making sure they know that grunt work is not above you. that, everyone else in that room has done that at some point in their career, and you're willing to do it to get it done. So even hearing the way you described, living in your, we'll call it, I think the posh people would call it a micro apartment.
Yeah.
Living in your Seattle micro apartment.
Yes. Yes.
It just sounds like, it sounds to me, Ben, like you were determined to show everyone that you were not above any part of this experience. Is that a fair assessment?
For sure. For sure. I think my first week in Seattle, I got to the office at 5 a.m. every day. And, we didn't practice till 4 o'clock. So we were a later, staffs arrive at different times. We were a later staff where our coaches probably wouldn't get in till 9 a.m. because we weren't leaving the office till 9 p.m. at night. So, I won't say I was there at 5 a.m. all year. I realized I can get there at 7 and be all right. But, yeah, I mean, you have to put in the work. And Coach Hop said it to me at the end of my GA year. He said, my favorite thing about you is there's no task too big or too small. And, I whether it was wiping up the floor, whatever needed to be done, however small the task, you have to do it. Yeah, that's how you, like you said, that's how you prove yourself.
This is so important to me because I think this is where, especially for our players that are listening, you realize there's not a terrible difference between making it as a player and making it as a coach. Because, I'm obviously talking out of order, but flash forward now, you're the first assistant at Siena, and it's because of a multi-year long ethos of not being above doing any of the work. And that's the exact same message that you're preaching to your players. Isn't that? I mean, I'd at least assume so.
No question. And it's for players, for coaches, it's how great do you want to be? What do you want to get out of this experience? What do you want to get out of your playing career? What do you want to get out of your coaching career? Are you okay with being good,
sure,
being average, being bad, or are you gonna milk everything you can out of your, God-given ability to maximize your potential? And most people don't maximize their potential, whether it's coaching, playing, whether it's just a regular 9-to-5 job, whatever you do in your life. I want to maximize my coaching career and be the best coach that I could be. And for me, that involved that took working 14, 16-hour days every day I still do it a lot of days. So certain people, whether Coach Hop had a great line. He said, how you do anything is how you do everything. And, when you grind on the court, typically that means you're probably going to grind in the classroom. And when you're a good person on the court and you're a good teammate, you're probably going to be a good teammate in every walk of life. You're going to be a good husband. You're going to be a good wife. You're going to be a good father. So, I took a ton from that year, and I think there are a lot of parallels in any walk of life, whether it's the basketball industry or not, of just having that grinder's mentality, which a lot of people nowadays don't.
You're not. We're gonna bring you back for another podcast, maybe season 2, and you and I are just gonna vent about society for 90 minutes. But we're gonna save that.
You can call me tonight and you can talk about it.
I appreciate that. So I'm intentionally gonna skip some parts of your career because I want to ask you about those parts a little bit later when we really dive into the recruiting stuff. But just so our listeners have an opportunity to get to know a little bit more about you in detail. You take a couple years away from Washington, you go back to Washington, and now you're in a coaching capacity. And of very important note to me, you do, in my opinion, one of the most difficult jobs at the Division I level, which is you coordinate recruiting operations. Now, at the high school level, players and parents are going through this process. And I can't blame them for this. They're really not thinking about how the colleges are approaching it because they have to do their own, overwhelming tasks of trying to navigate the recruiting process. But as someone who has done it and has an opportunity to now explain to a listener base, this is what running recruiting operations at a high-level Division I program actually looks like. This is your floor. Describe that experience to our listeners.
Yeah, so Coach Hop gave me a lot of leeway to kind of oversee a lot of our recruiting in my last year at Washington, which really was the 2024 class, and we ended up not even being there to coach those guys. So a lot of what I did in recruiting ended up not really having an impact in terms of being able to coach those guys then. But that 23 offseason in terms of the transfer portal, and then that 24 season putting together a high school class, I kind of was in the mix on all of that. So to kind of explain to you and the listeners, more importantly, obviously, of how recruiting is done at that level, is you have your head coach and your 3 assistants that are allowed to go on the way of recruiting. At Washington, we had our war room, it was called, and we had 2 boards that are probably bigger than the wall behind you, just with names. Just names of
filled with names, right?
Filled with names. So I had one transfer board, and that was kids that, we had no idea if they were going to enter the portal or not. It was just guys across the country that, hey, if they do enter the portal, we would be interested in them. And then on the other board was our high school side, where I would have the 2024, the 2025, the 2026, and the 2027 class. We're all on that board. So we're really recruiting 3 years in advance. And for us, just to give people an idea of like the amount of names that you go through, our transfer portal board at its largest was, I believe, over 100 names. And our high school board, I think my 2024 class at its largest was 70 names. So you're talking about 70 names for literally 2 spots. We took 2 high school kids in the 2024 class. So that gives you the idea of just how wide of a net that we cast. And again, you cross a lot of those names off relatively quickly, and you whittle down, hey, these are all 10 to 12 main targets, but you're really zeroed in on, hey, okay, these are our 12 main targets. Well, how are we going to get them? Right? And you're traveling across the country during the spring and summer and during the high school season, seeing these players as much as possible. We had Zoom Diallo, the number 1 point guard in the country at the time, and was the number 1 player in the state of Washington, was at Prolific Prep in California. I mean, the amount of flights I took from Washington to the SFO San Francisco airport to go see him, we went as a whole staff. Coach Hop, our head coach, went out to see him 4 or 5 times. I went out to see him. The max you could see is 7 times. I saw him 7 times during the high school. And that's during our season, right? That's not just during the summer when we saw him every live period session, but you're going out to see him 7 times. And I think at that level, it's actually easier at that level because there are only so many players that are good enough to play at that level. And for me, it was a great experience in terms of evaluating talent and zeroing in on, hey, these are the guys we should be going after the hardest. But at that level, there's a ton of players that want to come play for you that you have to have that hard conversation of, hey, man, we're heading in a different direction. And those are the hardest conversations to have. The hardest conversations I've ever had in this business is telling a high school kid that I've been recruiting, hey, we can't take it. But it's at that level, I don't think people understand. You're making phone calls every day. You're talking to 4 or 5 players every day. You're talking to their parents. You're talking to their high school coach. You're talking to their AAU coach. You're talking to their trainer. You're talking to their cousin. You're talking to everyone in their circle to prove to them, hey, like, you are a priority. And this is what we see for you. And, you're really selling. You're selling, and you're selling 3 things. You're selling their role with the program, and you're selling the relationship, and not really we're not allowed to have these conversations as assistant coaches, with NIL and everything and everything around that. But to a certain extent, you're selling the financials of, hey, we'll be able to take care of you here from that standpoint. So those at that level, those are really the 3 things you're selling. And you got to build that relationship, and you have to sell realistically. I'm always transparent. Hey, this is what your role is going to be. We view you as a guy that's going to come in and impact right away. Or, we view you as a guy that might need to redshirt, but we think can have a major impact in 2 to 3 years.
I love that even as we start talking about NIL, I love that a non-negotiable for you is role definition. This is something that we have not connected about, but I don't think this will surprise you in the least. When I give presentations to AAU teams or when I talk to recruits one-on-one, I basically quantify for them that a visit doesn't go well unless there has been clear role definition of where that coaching staff sees you. Now, you've been in this long enough that I'm sure you've met other coaches that don't do that, and you see what this looks like when the process goes wrong. So I'm putting you on the spot here, and I apologize for that. But can you please, since it seems very important to you, can you please state to our listeners why it's so important to get that role definition in your process?
It's so important because that's what you're asking them to buy into, right? You're asking them to buy into the
Right.
role that you have vision for them. So whether, you don't want to bring in a kid that's expecting to play 35 minutes and his family's expecting him to play 35 minutes if you're expecting him to play 10, because guess what? He's not going to be happy. His family's not going to be happy, right? And when you have unhappy players and unhappy families in your program, you're going to lose games. That's just what happens. And you have to, I think a lot of people don't do it, but I'm always transparent. And there are players I've recruited that, hey, you're going to be the guy. And there's players I've recruited, hey, you're going to be lucky to see any time on the court this year. And if you're not transparent and everyone's not on the same page, that's how issues arise. And if coaches are avoiding those conversations, it probably means that they don't have a large role and vision for you. And then the sad part about our business too is people lie. And you run into that too, where, hey, they told me I was going to have this role and I didn't. And there's certain times where it might be on you. They might have had that role and vision for you and you didn't do what you needed to do in order to maintain that role. So that happens at times as well. But I think way too often, there's 13 scholarship players that are all coming into the summer thinking they're going to be the guy, and there's only one or two guys.
This is so important that we just reiterate and hammer this home. The most successful teams are the teams that consistently define roles and generate buy-in for those roles. And I really appreciate you touching on that. So my last sort of background question, because I think you've done such a good job telling your story. And I think our listeners are going to get so much from this. But now you're here. You have returned to the Capital Region. You are now in Loudonville, New York, as the first assistant at Siena. You are working under a first-time head coach, albeit a basketball legend in the state of New York, Gerry McNamara. And I guess, I don't mean to ask you this bluntly. I don't want to be like, why, Ben? But I do want to know what leads you to make this decision and come back to the Capital Region at this time.
Gerry McNamara. And, I had,
okay, there you go.
I had some, options at some theoretically higher levels and some options to be, third or fourth assistant at the high major level. And, this opportunity was one that I couldn't pass up. And the reason I say that is because me and GMAC have developed a relationship over the last few years, and I believe in him. And he is the same guy every day. Whether he's talking to me, whether he's talking to a recruit, a donor, the president of the school, a parent, whoever he's talking to, he is himself. And he is a great human being. Sure. And he does stuff the right way, and he cares about the right things. And for him, he said it to me, and obviously we're in a crazy world of college sports with NIL and everything else going on. For him, it's always about the relationships. It's always about the relationships, and that's why you get into coaching. You get into coaching to build these lifelong relationships and help young men, reach their potential. And he's all about the right stuff. On top of that, Siena's an incredible job in this league. A tremendous playing environment, tremendous fan base, tremendous arena, pro arena, tremendous practice facilities, weight room. We have campus is beautiful. We have everything we need here to win at a high level. I've had other opportunities in this league, and I felt like this was an opportunity where we can go in and really make an impact and compete for championships. And that's what you want as a coach. And people won't tell you there's certain jobs in every conference where it's damn near impossible to compete for a championship. And when you get to a spot like this where you realistically can go and compete for a championship, if we do what we're supposed to do and we bring in the right personnel, that's an incredible opportunity. And, getting back to New York obviously helps, and being back in the capital region is a major plus for me. Uh, but ultimately, I'm not going to Siena if it's not with Gerry McNamara.
I love that. And I think it's so awesome. And especially, it's with your own experience to have a coaching staff that's value aligned, how important that is in moving the needle further, faster. So that's awesome. I'm so excited to keep track of it. Now I want to return to when I went back out of order earlier with these questions, because now we can talk about the recruiting process. And Ben, you have an experience that makes you, in my opinion, extremely uniquely qualified to talk about some of the big misunderstandings about this recruiting process, which is that in between your two stints at Washington, you worked with Made Hoops. You put together some of the biggest basketball events annually in the country. You worked with some of the top AAU programs on the boys' side in the country. And you basically, were sitting in the front row of the nuts and bolts of recruiting at the very highest level. And I don't want to be too broad with this question, so please take this in whatever direction you'd like, but what were the most important things that you learned doing that? Because I imagine that you saw a lot of things that were like, oh, that's why this is the way it is. So what were those eye-opening things for you?
Yeah, I think the people that run grassroots basketball events are some of the hardest working people in the entire basketball industry. I'll tell you that it is way harder to run an event with 300 teams than it is to do my job now. My job is way easier now than when I was running events with 300 teams. And, Chad Babel, the owner of Made Hoops, who's also very involved with the Nike EYBL, he does a tremendous job of trying to run these events at the highest level. And what I mean by that is making sure, the branding is right, making sure there's write-ups post-event highlighting the best players in the event, making sure you have security, making sure you have good referees, making sure you're paying an exorbitant amount of money to make sure you do have good referees, and really catering to your customer, which is the players, coaches, and spectators, which is oftentimes family members. So it's a tremendously difficult job, kind of narrowing in and focusing on the recruiting process side of it. I think there's so many mistakes that are made. The simple one is just, are you going to play for the highest level team where you might have a diminished role? Or are you going to play for, a team that's a step down where you're going to have a major role? And I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong, but I think a lot of times people just get into situations where you're putting yourself in a situation where you're not going to get recruited at the level you want to get recruited at. If you want to get recruited at Siena and you're playing for a non-circuit team and you're coming off the bench, we are not going to recruit. There's almost a 0% chance we're recruiting you. If you're a 6th or 7th man on a non-circuit team, you have almost no chance of getting a Division I scholarship. And it's oftentimes not that player's not good enough, but you're not in the right situation for us to say, no, that's a kid that we should be recruiting. So I think a lot of people make those poor decisions.
How can you recruit someone that you don't see? How can you recruit someone that you don't see?
No question. And on the flip side, I think a lot of people then on the flip side, they play in the wrong events. If you're on the shoe circuits, if you're playing in Made Hoops, if you're playing in certain other independent grassroots events and there's coaches there, okay, well, now I have a chance to get recruited if I'm a major player on this team. But there's times where I'll see a coach that tweet, oh, we went 5-0 and won another championship in some rinky-dink event wherever, and there wasn't a coach in the gym. And I would always say, I'd rather go 1-4 on the weekend and have 3 kids on my team get scholarship offers than go win a meaningless championship and none of my kids get seen by college coaches. So when you're making that decision of what AAU team to play for, it's a huge decision. And, what is your role going to, similar to the college level, what is your role going to be? What is your relationship with that coach? And then the third one that obviously differs from the college level, what events are you playing in? Are there going to be coaches there watching you? And the last part I'll say with the coaches, and you know this, does that coach have juice? Does that program have juice? If I get a call from your head coach, do I know that he's going to steer me in the right direction when he says, this is a kid you should look at? Because there's people that if they tell me that, I am watching that player's film. I am making sure I see that player in person. There are also coaches that if they say it, yeah, I might watch the film, but, you know, I don't have the relationship with him or he steered me wrong in the past. I don't need to go watch it. So it's a
Right.
huge decision. It's a huge decision. And I see a ton of players and families make the wrong decision that really sets their career back in a significant step. Because as you know, there's a lot of players that are neck and neck in terms of talent level, in terms of ability. And it's those margins oftentimes that separate you.
It's so interesting to hear you say that. What you just shared is in such alignment with the scholarship level players that I interviewed for my research, and they categorized two specific things, Ben. Thing one that they needed out of AAU was mentorship. So to your exact point, when you call somebody a reputable mentor who knows how to place people at multiple levels and knows what it actually takes to be successful at each level and can get them through that. And the other thing they said was visibility. I did not talk to a single kid that, with the hindsight of what AAU actually did for them, said to me, winning in the AAU level mattered to me. It was them being mentored to get better as a player, steered in the right direction, and then put in front of coaches where they were targeting trying to play. Now, that doesn't mean that every kid that aspires to play D1 is going to play D1. There are harsh realities that come with this process as well. But it starts with mentorship and visibility, and it makes me so happy. You have no idea. It makes me so happy to hear that you just shared that, because I think that, frankly, that is universal across sports and not just for basketball. I think there's a lot of disconnects in club in general, and being a part of a club that wins a lot doesn't necessarily matter, especially if you're playing in tournaments where, like, who were you playing against?
No, and you hit on a point. You hit on a point there too that I think a lot of people don't realize. Also, is there's only so many Division I spots. So one of the most important things you can have is a mentor, right, and who is honest with you and says, "Hey, man, you're not a Division I player." Because I'll see that too, where it's this kid would be a great Division III player, but guess what? He's playing on this circuit team in an event where there's no Division III coaches. I'm not saying there's not 40 Division I coaches on the baseline, but there's no Division III coaches and you're a Division III player. So you're not getting anything out of this experience. So I think that happens a lot as well. And then the last thing I'll touch on too, that I think is a major thing in recruiting now, that, and especially my time at Made Hoops, that a lot of people talk about, and especially with NIL and transfer portal and people recruiting less high school kids to an extent, is it's if you are a Division I player and you might not have that chance right away, you know, what are those other levels you can go to and springboard your career? You know, and part of that's reclassing. Part of that's going to prep school. Like, I advise a lot of kids, kick the can down the road as long as you can. You know, go prep for a year, reclass for a year. If you're really that level of player, and I believe you're that level of player, go to a prep school year. Go to a prep school year. You'll look a lot more appealing to me and my staff when you're a year older, a year more physically developed than you will this year. And, you know, nowadays, like if you look at our roster this year, we have a Division II transfer. We have a junior college transfer. And there were Division III transfers and NAI transfers that we were taking hard looks at. So I think very different from when I was in college. When you went Division III, you were pretty much stuck there. Outside of 1 in a million, your Duncan Robinson situations and maybe a couple others. If you were playing D3, you were stuck there. And it's not like that anymore. If you go and produce NAIA, Division III, junior college, like schools at our level will look at you hard. Like we want guys that have been proven at the college level, regardless of what level you've been at. And, you know, there was junior college players this year that went to high major schools. There were Division II players getting recruited at high major schools. And they're Division II players that go on to be players of the year at Division I conferences. So I think a lot of times people turn their nose up at those D2, D3, JUCO, NAIA options. And in reality, you're probably better off going and being a significant contributor on a D2 or a D3 team than you are going to a low major where you're the 13th scholarship guy. Because guess what? When you don't play and you transfer out of there, no other Division I's going to take you.
It's so interesting to hear you touch on this because it allows me to segue into talking to you about the transfer portal. And something that you and I have in common is that we were both hired as first assistants to jobs in a Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference school in the era of the transfer portal. And something that I am trying to explain to younger people right now, because obviously most of my work is targeted at high school kids going through this process for the first time. What I say to many of them is, I need you to think about this a little bit differently, because you're no longer just comparing yourselves to other high school kids. If you take a visit and you don't impress the coaching staff the way you should, the next kid that visits campus might not be a kid. Like, they might be 20. They might be more mature, more developed with experience. And, you know, while I do think that changes to the transfer portal make the athletic experience significantly more equitable for the athletes, which is the intent, and I do think it's honoring it, I also think it's allowed coaches to try to find more mature and more proven people. So with that in mind, Ben, can you talk to our listeners about, you just got to Siena, you've got a rebuild on your hands. How are you trying to leverage the transfer portal to accelerate that rebuild?
Yeah, I mean, we have 3 returning scholarship players at Siena, so we had 10 open scholarships to fill. And we filled 9 of them so far. And, you know, out of those 9, we brought in 3 high school, we brought in 6 transfer portal. And transfer portal from everything, like I said, Division II, Division II, JUCO, low major, mid major, high major. We got transfers from every level. You know, outside of Division III and NAIA, we literally took a transfer from the highest of high major all the way, you know, down to Division II. And you're trying to find the best talent. That's what who's the best talent that we can realistically get? Who's the best fit for our program that we can realistically get? Obviously, there's players we'd love to have that, you know, we have no chance at given what they've done, and they're probably going to go to a high major. They're going to get paid X amount of money that, you know, obviously we can't compete with at Siena. But we're trying to leverage every aspect of the transfer portal. And, you know, it's like you said, it's very appealing when you have a kid who, regardless of level, has proven that he can have a major impact at the collegiate level. So we try to we have our board for next year already in the works, you know, for the 2025 class, and on the high school side and on every level of college basketball. So, you know, you're trying to, as you know, you're trying to leverage at every part of the portal that you can.
On the subject of trying to leverage different things and different attributes, I'm curious to know, for you personally and for your current staff at Siena, what are some of those attributes and intangibles that you're looking for in terms of soft skills? Because something you alluded to before is a lot of these races are competitive. A lot of these, you know, kids are almost tied with talent. What are some of these attributes that are giving one kid potentially an edge over another kid in your eyes?
For sure. And I'll start by saying I see so many clips talking about players' character and certain things, and I want to be very clear when I say this. You have to have a certain level of talent for us to recruit you. I think there's certain times where players that aren't talented and aren't talented enough for this level, they might be the greatest person on planet Earth. But there has to be a base level of talent for us to want to recruit. So that's first and foremost is
right. There's a floor.
There's a floor. So watching film, evaluating in person, and saying he's good enough, right? That's the first step. He's good enough. After that, like you're saying, it gets really, really tight because, to be honest with you, between probably Virginia and Boston, there's probably 100 guards that are 6'3" and below that for the 2025 class, we could take any of the 100 and talent level they would fit in, right? So like you're talking about, you know, what separates you. And for us, like two pillars of our program, maturity and respect, right? Are you mature?
Mm,
Am I going to have to worry about you going to class? Am I going to have to worry about what you're doing on Saturday night? Am I going to have to worry about me getting phone calls of he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing? Right? That's so that maturity piece is huge. The second part is the respect piece. You know, as when you're looking to me as one of your coaches and you're looking at Gerry McNamara as our head coach, are you going to look him in the eyes and treat him with respect? Because we're going to treat you with respect if you reciprocate that respect, right? And we're not big yellers and screamers. We're, hey, if I can get my point across talking to you like this, then I don't need to yell at you, right? And if I do need to yell at you, you're probably not the right fit for our program. Not to say that I don't yell here and there, because I can lose my mind on certain things, but for the most part,
of all people, I'm not going to hold you accountable for that, so you're fine.
but for the most part, this is the same way I'm talking to you is the same way I talk to the players that I coach. And are you going to have
Right.
that respect and maturity factor? And you know, a lot of times that comes from, do you have a good support system around you? And I got a text today, and I love getting these texts of, hey, I talked to one of your players. What an unbelievable young man, right? And those are the texts as a coach where it's like, we recruited the right guy. You know, we brought in the right guy to represent our program, because I'm getting a text from a random person who didn't need to reach out to me saying, hey, just so you know, he is a great young man, right? And those are the type of people that you want to bring into your program. So off the court, I think kind of all those things. And then on the court, you know, the biggest, how hard do you play, right? Like, how hard do you lay it on the line every single time you touch the floor? Coach McNamara said it to every recruit we had on campus this offseason. He said, at the end of the games, I'm going to watch them twice. When I shut my computer at the end of the second time watching it, I want to be able to shut my computer, win, loss, regardless of the result. Man, we have a great group. You know, they gave me everything they had. And as a coach, you know, when your group gives you everything they have, and you get out talented, or the ball doesn't break your way that night, you could probably get some sleep, right? But when you slam your computer down after watching it back the second time, it's like, man, we didn't give the proper effort, or we weren't locked in mentally. Those are the nights, as you know, where you're lucky to get 2 hours, because it's like there's something wrong.
You basically lie in bed with the laptop being like, how did this happen?
Like,
yeah,
no, I'm with
you.
What is wrong? What needs to change? And, you know, so those are the things we look for. And, you know, obviously I'm not going to get into super specifics of, you know, being locked in a huddle with your head coach. All that stuff's important. But, you know, respect, maturity, and are you laying it on the line every time you're on the floor?
I love it. So I got one more for you, because you have touched on so many things, from the power of relationships to, you know, the importance of finding the right fit for yourself, not only collegiately, but also at the club or AAU level. There are so many big nuggets in this. I'm so excited, honestly, to clip the content, because I think you're going to be very popular. But I have to ask you this, because I've been asking everybody. Obviously, there are some big myths about how the recruiting process works, and I want to give you the final word. Is there anything you haven't talked about, or any myths that you'd like to bust, just so that you could say to, you know, any recruiter parent listening, and just say to them, this is how it really works?
I think a lot of people don't do enough self-reflection, and don't do enough have enough honest conversations with themselves of, hey, who really wants me? Who did they offer me a scholarship, or did they, at the Division III level, did they offer me a spot on the team? If I wanted to commit right now, would they take me? Right? Is the coach in contact with me every couple days? Right? And are they calling me? Are they texting me? Are they FaceTiming me? Are they coming to see me in person? I have certain guys, I'm getting recruited by this school, this school, this school, this school. I went to watch you play, none of those schools were there. And I saw 5 games of yours, and none of those schools were there. So I think a lot of people get caught up with the hype of, I'm getting recruited by X, Y, and Z. And like I said, a lot of every school's like does it the way that I do. They have lists of 50 to 60 guys, and they're only going to take two or three. And I think a lot of people, because the school reached out, they think they're in that top two or three, and they're not. They're just not. And I think that's why you need a good high school coach, a good AAU coach that's going to be honest with you. Hey, that coach called me. He really wants you. Or, hey, I know you want to go there, but their coach has never reached out to me. If you wanted to commit right now, they probably wouldn't take you. And then you're in certain instances, you're paying for X service or you're paying for Y service that if you pay for this service, we're going to get you a scholarship offer. We're going to get you to this level. No, they're not. I'm very rarely taking a kid or offering a kid because X recruiting service reached out and said, hey, this kid would be a great fit for you. That's not how it works. I'm talking to high school coaches. I'm talking to AAU coaches. I'm talking to reputable programs that I've recruited from before or that I've been in contact with before. And I know, okay, last year they had 4 Division I players. This junior college had 4 Division I players. Or this AAU program in the last 10 years has turned out 25 Division I players. I ask people that all the time. When people ask for my advice, oh, I'm going to play for this AAU program, and you think you're the Siena level player. Okay, when's the last time they had a player at the MAC level? 10 years ago. Or never. Well, guess what? It's probably not the right spot for you. Or you go to this program that says, hey, I put a kid in the MAC every year the last 6 years. Okay, if you think that's the level player you are, they've done it clearly. Okay, that might be the right opportunity for you. But I think people always think they're getting recruited at a higher level than they are. And especially in today's day and age of NIL and the transfer portal and all that, I advise people look at the level, people look at a lot of different things. Go where you're wanted. Go where that coach really rocks with you. Go where that coach is, promising you X role and has built that relationship with you. And I think that's the biggest thing I'd say is, go where you're wanted. Don't go somewhere just to go somewhere, because guess what? If you just go to the highest level you can, there's a really good chance that you're going to be transferring within the next year and you're going to be in a worse situation than you would have been otherwise.
That is so powerful. And I think, honestly, my favorite part of this advice is that it's coming from someone who everything that you just asked them to do is a calculation that you made as a high school and college athlete. Like, you were reflective, you were self-aware, and it helped you navigate this journey, in my opinion, in a very accelerated way. And now here you are, Ben Lee, returning to the Capital Region and doing an outstanding job. Anything else you want to plug? What are we looking forward to in year one with Siena?
Yeah, I'll say, the last part of what I'll say just off that last point in terms of, going where you're wanted. And I can't, it's going where you're wanted, but even more importantly, I think this is something else kids miss out on a lot. What do you want? What do you want out of the experience?
Right.
For me, I had Division III schools that were recruiting me where I was going to start as a freshman. To be honest with you, I didn't need to play 30 minutes a game in my college career. That wasn't my long-term. My long-term goal was to coach. So I wanted to be with a great coach. I wanted to be at a good academic school. I wanted to be at a school I could have fun at. And Union was the perfect choice for me, even though in 4 years I played spot minutes for 4 years. And I was content with that role. So I think a lot of times, that's the last I'll say, is really do some self-reflection of what do you want? Do you want to play at the highest level? Do you want to make sure you're playing a lot of minutes? Do you want to make sure you're a part of a great culture? Because you can decide those things. And don't go to the highest level because someone's telling you to. What do you want out of your college experience? You only have 4 to 5 years. And it's a very important decision to set up the rest of your life. And don't take that decision lightly. In terms of Siena for this year, I mean, just super excited. We're in week 4 with our guys right now. And it's such a fun group to be around every day because Coach McNamara has recruited great human beings. And, we've turned down a lot of kids that have been probably would be some of the most talented players on our team, but they weren't the right fit culturally. And when you have kids that you love to be around and you love to coach every day, man, it's going to be a fun year. It's going to be a fun year. We have big hopes for this team, obviously, and the future of the program. Siena's an unbelievable program. Lucky to be a part of it. Great head coach leading us, and just it's a good feeling when you're happy to wake up and go to work every day.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. When you guys come up here, I can't wait to take you for wings. Ben, thank you so much again for your time. This was, I really cannot wait for our listeners to hear this. They're going to get a lot from this. Thank you again, and welcome back to the Capital Region, buddy.
Appreciate it, Coach.
That's going to do it for another episode of the Nail the Recruiting Process podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you got something out of today's podcast. If you'd like to learn more about anything related to Nail the Recruiting Process, the book, my work, maybe wanting to work with me one-on-one, anything under the sun, you're going to visit www.nailtherecruitingprocess.com. If you'd like to follow me on social media, you can follow me at Nail the Recruiting Process on Instagram or at Jared the Coach on Twitter and TikTok. Both of those handles are just one word, no characters, no spaces. If you'd like to ask something of me directly, if you'd like a question that maybe you want answered on a future podcast, or if you have an idea for something we should talk about in a future episode, please reach out to me via email. I would love to hear from you. My email address is recruitinggear@gmail.com. That's the word recruiting, then the word gear combined. recruitinggear@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope to catch you next time.